going to be data coming from Andhra Pradesh, and this is joint work with Vega Dickerson, who's unfortunately not here today. So essentially, what's the motivation for this study? As we all know and we are aware, given all the policy discourse and public discussions that we've been having in India lately, is that India has been performing pretty badly in terms of perceptions about corruption in public sector. So the Transparency International study in 2012 gave India a rank a 3.6 on a 0 to 10 scale from highly to least corrupt. So that ranks India as one of the more corrupt countries in the world. Corruption in public sector in India is consistently being perceived as being worse, and in other developing countries, the countries that we call BRICS, right? So the ones which have been growing almost as fast as India, so that's Brazil, China, and South Africa in the last decade. And so what kind of concerns do we have when we talk about corruption? Essentially, we have these potential adverse implications in the quality of public services that are being provided within the country, on private investments, and ultimately on economic growth. And so that's sort of the broad picture behind which, the picture that we have over here, where we want to talk about what are these potential policy measures that can be undertaken in order to address this the presence of corruption in Indian economy and in Indian society. So community monitoring has been perceived as a very low cost and powerful participatory tool that can not only raise awareness levels of beneficiaries of public programs in terms of what their entitlements are about the program, but also strengthen accountability of officials who are supposed to deliver those services to the electorate, so to speak, right? So what is the existing evidence that we have about the effectiveness of community monitoring programs? And of course, we don't have anything available on India at all in terms of a large-scale study. But there are, at least from the economics literature, and of course I might be biased, and if some of you are not from the field of economics, you can stop me here, and there are other studies which I might have ignored. But essentially what we are looking at from the perspective of my study over here also is quantitative. So the background that I would give you in terms of the existing evidence is also in terms of other quantitative studies that have looked at community monitoring. And what these studies have concluded essentially is that the success of participatory monitoring depends critically on certain key elements or ingredients. The first is that they should be easy for the stakeholders, or that includes particularly the beneficiaries of public programs, to be able to comprehend and measure the quality of public service. And that seems pretty reasonable, right? So if you cannot comprehend what the quality of the public service is and you're not able to measure it, there's no way that you can monitor the delivery of these public services, right? So these are studies that have been done with the World Bank, and also so that's the Khimani study that I'm referring to is looking at studies in Africa and in parts of Asia, and then cross-country study done by ONU. Now the second point is that in order for community monitoring to be effective, the beneficiaries should have high stakes in the delivery of these services. They should care about the delivery and the quality of the services that they're getting. And I'm going to get into it in more detail as I talk about the NREGA program itself. So if it's a good that I don't care about, then I'm not going to participate in community monitoring, and then I'm not going to care about whether the quality is good or bad or whatsoever, because there might be a free rider problem, in an economic sense, but I won't get into that. And finally, so suppose you have both of these ingredients available, right? So you have this that the stakeholders can comprehend and measure the quality of the public service, and that they care about the provision of these public services. Then what makes community monitoring effective in terms of improving accountability and improving the quality of public services would be the tightness of a mutually accepted contract between the service providers and the beneficiary, right? So you have to have an understanding, a discourse between the service provider and the beneficiaries in terms of, this is what I expect as a beneficiary in terms of the quality of service, and this is what I would like you to deliver. And then from the other end, the service provider would say, okay, this is how I can respond to you. And that has to be a contract that is mutually agreed upon, and that is tight, and that can be implemented. And that is what would make community monitoring effective in terms of improving the delivery of services. So this is just a summarization of what the literature tells us. And this has been studied, we were contrasting a study which was done in Uganda by Bjorkman and Svensson, which was extremely successful in rural area, in the rural area in UP, because there was absolute absence of this contract or understanding between the service provider and the beneficiary. Okay? So this is the background here. Now, what is this study trying to do? Essentially, the objective of our study is to think of what are the strengths and shortfalls of these existing social audits, which is the only large-scale community monitoring initiative that exists in India today, and which is in AP, in Andhra Pradesh. And the objective that we have over here is how can we bolster the effectiveness of this. So I don't want you to take away at the end of this presentation the view that we are saying that this is something that doesn't work and should be stopped, but for the objective over here is to think of bolstering the effectiveness of this community monitoring initiative. So what we're trying to do is to quantify the effects of this community monitoring program in Andhra Pradesh, which is evaluating, which is looking at the NREGA program specifically. We use panel data from the official social audit reports for a period of almost 5 years, from 2006 to 2010, to analyze what has happened to the irregularities in the implementation of NREGA across sample districts, given this community, given that this community monitoring has been happening, has it been effective or not? And essentially, our focus is going to be on the kind of malpractices that are of widespread concern in the delivery of public services in general, and also in particular in this public program that we will be looking at. So a lot of you might be aware of this. The NREGA mandates the conduct of regular audits by local stakeholders or Gram Sabha. So the way it has been, it's sort of an idealistic proposal by the Act, because what it envisages is that the community that itself would come up with these a community monitoring tool and mechanism and be able to monitor what the quality of the services in terms of the provision of work opportunities is under NREGA. What is unique here is that the Andhra Pradesh government responded to this proposal within the Act by institutionalizing and inducing social audits. So rather than waiting for these social audits to emerge from the grassroots, these have been institutionalized by the state itself within Andhra Pradesh. And by November of 2007, almost all the districts which were in phase 1 of the NREGA had got audits, and during our study, by the time we're looking at the period 2006 to 2010, all these districts that we have, both phase 1 and phase 2, had received social audits, and not just once but multiple social audits. Okay, so what is the model that they have in mind? Just a brief overview. There's a schedule of social audits which are drawn up by what is called the SSAT, which is the organization which is independent of the government, but works with the Rural Development Department within Andhra Pradesh to come up with a schedule of social audits. Letters are sent to the district officials telling them the audit is going to happen. There's a formation of social audit teams which consists of auditors at the district level, at the block level, and the grassroots participation comes from these village social auditors who are trained by the auditors at the district level, who come from the district and from the block level. There's a verification of records. Following the verification of records, there's a public hearing of the findings of the audit, and finally there's a decision taken report in which the responsibilities for these malpractices is fixed on a particular functionary or multiple functionaries, and finally there's an action taken report in terms of what was the action taken if a particular official was found guilty, whether there was recovery of the funds that were pilfered, and so on and so forth. Okay. So we look across 100 randomly sampled mandals in 8 Andhra Pradesh districts. So we have about 300 gram panchayats that we are looking at, and then we have repeated observations for these same 300 gram panchayats starting from 2006 to 2010. So between 2006 and 2010, we have roughly about 700 audits, and these 700 audits would have happened in the same 300 gram panchayats. So on average, more than 2 audits per gram panchayat is the data that we have. And so just to give you an idea, the districts that we have is, we have 5 districts in Telangana, the ones which are shaded, and then we have Anantapur and Kurnool and Rayalaseema, and then Guntur in coastal Andhra Pradesh. So these are the 8 districts that we covered. Within these 8 districts, we randomly sampled 100 mandals, and within each mandal, you would have 3 gram panchayats. Okay? So that gives us 300 gram panchayats and 100 mandals. So what's the data? We look at the social audit reports, which tell us about the labor-related irregularities. So there are 2 components of expenditures on NREGA projects. You have the labor component, which is supposed to be 70% of expenditures, and the other is the 30% in materials. So the data that we have, which is the best available data, is the list of irregularities which were filed during the door-to-door verification process, where you would go and ask during the audit process the laborers who are listed on the worksite muster rolls whether they worked on that project or not, how many days they worked, what payment they got, so on and so forth. The materials related irregularities are done by the audit teams when they visit the work site, so they can measure. So suppose in the records it says there was a road that was built which was 1 kilometer long, the audit team can go and measure whether that road actually is 1 kilometer long or not, look at whether it exists or not in the first place, and what is the quality of the materials that were used, and so on and so forth. So each complaint is verified through affidavits, and then it is brought up during the public hearing. So there is a verification process, so that is not the case that you have only frivolous complaints coming up. So just to give you an idea, so we look, so you have audit, the first audit, the second audit, and the third audit. So we are going to look at 3 audits per GP. And so what we see is, so we have the blue histogram, the graph, which is showing us the total number of complaints. The red one, which is showing the labor complaints, the total number of labor complaints. And then these are the material complaints, and these are what is related to facilities, such as provision of water, a creche, and so on and so forth. So what we see is that the largest proportion of complaints are labor related. Then there are these material complaints. But what is interesting is when you just eyeball this figure, what you see is you see an increase in the number of complaints. You see increase in labor and then a fall, but then some sort of a secular increase in the material complaints, nothing much happening with facilities. So this is just the summary statistics. But what is interesting is that you might say, let's just ignore the material complaints because there aren't too many in number. But when you look at the mean amount per complaint, this is real in real terms, in 2006 rupees, the amount per material complaint is almost double of what it is for labor complaints. So there might be small amounts of pilferage for labor, but the material complaints, the amount that is being pilfered is potentially much larger than it is for labor. So if you just want to quantify the amount of leakages, then it is important to focus also on the material complaints, because that's where you could have much larger pilferage than in the labor component. Okay? So what do? We focus on impacts, but we recognize that there are limitations. The first limitation is that these audits were not rolled out randomly. That's ideally what we would want is that some gram panchayats are audited, get social audits, and others which are not. And those, or the ones which do get the audits, are randomly chosen as opposed to the ones that don't. And then I could compare the outcomes between these two in terms of the corruption, in terms of the leakage in the program, and I could assign causality to the incidence of the social audits. But unfortunately here, and as the case is in most public programs and other programs in India, it wasn't rolled out randomly. So we don't have that advantage. Secondly, we don't have baseline comparison. So what you would need is, before the audits were rolled out, were there data available on corruption? Now, of course, NREGA did not exist before the audits were rolled out, right? So there's no baseline over here that one could compare it with. We could have compared it with if the audits were rolled in 2 years after NREGA, let's say in 2008, and you have some data on the amount of leakages that were there in NREGA in 2006, 2007, and then audits come in, and then you can do a before and after comparison, right? So we don't have that either. So what do we do? In order to establish some credible association between social audits and program leakages, what our aim here is to look at what do repeated social audits end up giving us. Do repeated social audits, are they effective in reducing the number of incidents of these irregularities? Do they go down? So the expectation would be, let's say I'm looking at a sample where I don't have any baseline information, but my prior would be that once you have multiple audits happening in the same place, and if these audits are effective, then I should see some decline in these irregularities over time. And 5 years would be a reasonable period to expect that there would be some effect on irregularities, right? So that's what we are trying to do, but at the same time, we need to control for other factors that could have affected program implementation. And that's what we will try to do, because there could be other things that are happening which are also affecting the irregularities or the amount of corruption in the program, and we need to control for that in order to be able to associate the impact of social audits on the implementation of NREGA. So what are these confounding factors? One is, what is the efficiency at the mandal level? Now if I start comparing across mandals, in some mandals the bureaucracy might be more efficient, might be less corrupt, more corrupt, and so if I'm looking at the cross section, it wouldn't be the effect of the audits, but it would be just that the bureaucracy is different, right? So all of our analysis is going to be within mandal analysis. We are going to control for which is the mandal that we are looking at, and we look at variation in the level of corruption across villages in the same mandal, because the NREGA is implemented at the block level. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, the level of awareness of beneficiaries and learning by audit teams is obviously likely to change over time, right? So as I get exposure to the program, as I learn more about the program, I'm going to start becoming more aware of my entitlements. The number of complaints might just go up because of that, not because corruption per se has gone up, but because people have become more aware of their entitlements. At the same time, the audit teams might be learning, right? So at first they're like, oh, I don't know who I should look at or what the issues might be, but over time I realized, oh, this is a concern, that is another concern. So the number of complaints would go up as a result of that as well. So what we do in economics, what we would typically do in that case is to control for time trends. We expect that over time, all of these awareness and improvements in learning by the audit team will lead to an increase in the number of irregularities. And secondly, there could also be differences in program characteristics across districts over time. So it could be that, for instance, phase 1 districts is probably more corrupt. If you're looking at Telangana regions, which are typically supposed to have high levels of corruption than the non-Telangana regions. And there could be trends which are not specific, which are not the same across districts. There could be some districts behaving completely differently from other districts, or mandals for that matter behaving very differently from other mandals. So we have to control for trends which are specific to districts and specific to mandals. So that's what we try to do, and then I'll talk about other robustness tests that we have. I'm going to skip this. So the outcome that we are going to be interested in is the total number of irregularities, and we break them down by labor, by material, and within labor and material into different types of irregularities. If you don't like numbers, you don't have to focus on the table, you can just focus on the the stuff that's written over here. So what I'm summarizing from this table is that what we see is that while the total number of labor irregularities remain more or less the same, so what this audit 2 is telling me is what was the total number of irregularities compared to audit 1, and similarly audit 3, this number is telling me what were the total number of irregularities compared to audit 1. So if these are positive numbers, it means that they were higher compared to audit 1. Okay, and this is the difference between audit 3 and audit 2, so it tells you over time what was happening. So what we see here is that the total irregularities, they went up relative to audit 1 in audit 2, but overall it doesn't seem to be a secular increase. It's not significant, so we care about significance because you're at the Statistical Institute. I'm going to talk about things like significance. So it's as good as being zero, as good as being no change at all. But what we see is that there was a more than 300% increase in materials related irregularities, and that's a secular increase. So what you see is it went up by 0.8, then it increased by a much bigger number, and this difference is significant. So it means that between audit 1 to 2 to 3, there has been an increase in materials related irregularities. So the second main finding that we have is then we break this down by different types of labor related irregularities. For instance, non-payment or delay in wage payments, benami and impersonations, bribes and non-provision of work, which will be more administrative. And then in materials, you have ghost projects, projects which exist only on paper. Then you have poor quality of materials, bribes in payment of material expenditures, and then just an absence of material records, which would be an easy way to say, throw up your hands and say, I don't know what expenditures happen on this. If you're coming to me to ask me about records, I have no records. Okay. So what we see over here is there's a significant increase in irregularities related to bribes and absence of expenditure records in the material component. There's some decline that we see in non-provision of work between audit 1 and 2, but at the same time we don't see anything over here. So overall we don't see anything much changing here in the labor component, but we see that this increased, the bribes and the absence of records increased, and this is what has probably led to this increase in the total materials related irregularities. And finally, when we break it down in terms of amounts, there's a marginally significant decline in real amount per labor complaint and the total complaint. But these are very marginal because so they're significant, what we call significant at 10% is marginally significant, not very big effects, not in terms of magnitude, but in terms of their significance. And nothing that we see whatsoever for labor. Okay, so these negative numbers means that the amounts decline over time. Then we also try to look at other outcomes that people would care about, which is total real expenditure, proportion of rural connectivity works, total employment generated, and so on and so forth, and we don't see any action happening here either. So what would be other additional concerns that we could have? Is it possible that some places had more audits happening and other places having less audits happening? So those places which had more audits happening, if they were more corrupt, then these results could mean that it's not that corruption has gone up, it's just that it's harder to have corruption decline in these regions. So what we've done is we restricted the data to only those gram panchayats which had 3 audit rounds. So all of these gram panchayats that we've looked at would have had 3 audits in the period that we are looking at. There could be potential biases of the beneficiaries which could bias the outcomes that we are looking at. So what we do is we look at only irregularities which were filed by the audit team, because we expect that the audit teams would not be biased because they don't come from these gram panchayats, they don't come from these mandals, they are complete outsiders. So they should be an unbiased unbiased participant in the audit process. And we also take care, as I mentioned, possible differences in the implementation of programs across mandals. So what we see is that we do not detect a significant effect of the audit process on reducing the aggregate number of complaints. We see an insignificant effect on the labor component of the expenditures, but a significant increase in the number of material-related irregularities. So what we are recording is a shift in the anatomy, in the structure of corruption from what we would call first generation irregularities and leakages to second generation, which would be harder to detect. Okay? So you have easy to detect irregularities, for instance, non-provision of employment, non-payment, ghost projects, and so on and so forth, which you would have expected to have been affected early on in the audit process. So if nothing else, easy to detect irregularities, particularly in the labor component, should have declined in the early years of the audit process. We don't see that happening. We see a shift in the anatomy of corruption towards more difficult to detect materials irregularities, and no effect whatsoever on the easy to detect irregularities. So what we claim then is that while the audit process may have been effective in detecting irregularities, it has not acted as a deterrent against corruption in reducing these irregularities. And it has, if at all, it has had only a marginal impact if you want to think in terms of the amount of these irregularities. So what would be the policy recommendations? The most important thing is, why do we see this? Why don't we see any effectiveness of the audit process at all? Okay. So the first, we will come back to what I had summarized in the literature review and what the literature tells us. What we see here is an absence of any contract between the service provider and the beneficiary. So I'll show you this table now, which is taken from the Andhra Pradesh government website and has all the districts which are in our sample. And this is looking at data from 2006 to 2013. So if you look at the number of irregularities and then this as the proportion of these irregularities for which disciplinary action has been taken, and we classify them into minor disciplinary action, medium and major disciplinary action. These are minimal. The major disciplinary actions, which would be termination, dismissal, criminal action, they are barely 1% of all these irregularities, and the medium ones, which would be even which you would expect to take place, like suspension, show cause notices, and so on and so forth, are barely 2.5%. So where is the state here in terms of ensuring that the process of the audits culminates in punishment of those who are held responsible, and so that the process is credible? Moreover, we don't see recovery of these amounts. Most of these amounts have not been recovered. They are yet to be recovered. So what we point out here then is that there is this absence of an enforceable and credible contract that should be there to allocate responsibilities and define strict timelines for punishing those who are held responsible in the decision taken report and at the public hearing. Until and unless you make the process credible, why would I care about the audit process at all? Why would I come up front and complain or register irregularities? Because I have no belief in this process whatsoever. So over time, this process is going to lose credibility. Secondly, the audit teams need to respond to the changing patterns of corruption. And what do you need for that? You have to bolster capacity and experience. You must do that. And in order to do that, you have to ensure that there isn't high turnover in the audit personnel, which is very likely to happen when they're working on minimum salaries. And at the same time, there need to be technological innovations and expertise in order to be able to catch these harder to detect materials related irregularities. And what is very important that we take away from Andhra Pradesh, which would be a strength of the process over here, is that these community-led audits are not going to materialize spontaneously. Unlike what the NREGA says, the Gram Sabha is going to conduct these community-led audits. But is that really happening? Is that a reality in other parts of the country? No. What we see in Andhra Pradesh is a very unique combination of a top-down approach, where the state government has institutionalized these audits, and that has leveraged grassroots participation. So in order to be able to have this community monitoring process take roots, to be able to sustain it, there must be some top-down participation and initialization of the process. And finally, what we are learning from here is, and that's something that all program evaluators would worry about in India in particular, is this complete absence of concern for building in program evaluation at the onset of the program itself. We would have been even better informed if the audit process had been rolled out randomly, for instance, and we would have had a much better and we would have been standing on much firmer ground in terms of advising how these audits could be rolled out to other parts of the country. So to conclude, as I pointed out in the beginning, the purpose of this exercise is not to say that community monitoring is meaningless. That is not something that's going to work. What we want to point out over here is that there has been a strong political commitment in Andhra Pradesh, which is probably necessary in other parts of the country for community monitoring to even take off, right? Because there are a lot of positive externalities which are generated by this in terms of increasing the awareness of beneficiaries, increasing awareness about their entitlements, which has been other work which I think Yamini has been involved with, and there's been work at the World Bank, which we have not looked at in this particular study. But these positive externalities are significant benefits of the community monitoring program. But, and at the same time, the cost of conducting these audits is minimal. It's 1% of the NREGA expenditures in any year. This is minuscule amounts. So you have low costs, you have potentially high benefits. So what's stopping us from making it work? What is stopping us from making it work is the lack of political will to take it to the last mile and deliver, which would be to punish those who have been found guilty of pilfering funds. And until and unless there is political will to be able to do that, and the community monitoring is unlikely to be successful. And given this, we find support for that argument. So I think I'm going to stop over here. I don't know whether I've gone over time. Okay, great.